And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad.
Where do you start with that? Blaming the victim once again. This is what Donald Trump does, as we did this week. We're talking about Ukraine, of course. That's Donald Trump this week saying that never would have happened if he'd been president. Of course, it's moot the fact that 20% of Ukraine was already under Russian control when he was president, which he did nothing about. You know, on and on with the lies. Ukraine's on our mind this week. There's a lot to talk about. I mean, there's a lot going on, obviously, this week. Another crazy week in D.C., crazy week in the country. We just can't leave it at that. But I did want to focus a little bit on Ukraine and exactly what all this means, because this week, it's the 3-year anniversary as we approach this week, next week, 3 years since Russia invaded on their 3-day special operation. And meanwhile, of course, here's Donald Trump saying he's going to solve the whole thing. Well, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. There's just too much to get to. But I did want to pick up what's happened in the recent days and the stupidness of what they're saying about Ukraine, about President Zelenskyy, and the smears that are going against him. I mean, as you can see, Donald Trump was once again, lying about it. Here's a post he did about President Zelenskyy, on and on, modestly successful comedian, billions of dollars. I'm not going to read that. Well, horse shit, about stealing money, about getting rich. It's all lies. Lies. I mean, how much of a lie is this? I mean, how much of a lie is Donald Trump giving that this is the cover of the New York Post today? Owned by the Murdochs, supporters of Donald Trump. When he says, who's the dictator? Basically, Donald Trump saying that Zelensky's the dictator because he hasn't had an election because of martial law, that he's not popular, all these things. This is the response from the New York Post, his hometown paper, if you will, telling the truth about Donald Trump. But they had CPAC this week as well. And here's Speaker Mike Johnson. And just watch Johnson's approach to the fact that what Trump decided to do was have initial discussions about the resolution of the war in Ukraine with only Russia and Saudi Arabia. And this is where the lawyer himself, recovering lawyer Mike Johnson, sees it.
He's doing a level set. Right? You've got to get both parties to come and bring about an end to this conflict, which will serve America's interest and everybody's interest around the world. But I think of it very much like a mediation or arbitration. If you're a lawyer, I'm a recovering lawyer, forgive me, I think of those terms. But when you start a mediation, you start an arbitration between two parties, you don't bring them into the room for that first meeting. You do it separately. So I think Zelenskyy complaining that he wasn't invited to the first meeting with Saudi Arabia and Russia is misplaced. I mean, what Trump's trying to do is do a level set, put the conditions in place for that real negotiation to happen, and we've got to allow him to do what he does. Remember, he wrote The Art of the Deal. He knows what he's doing.
Absolutely.
Okay, first, he didn't actually write The Art of the Deal. It was a ghostwriter. He's never written any of his fucking books. It's always been a ghostwriter. But Republicans love saying that he's the art of the deal. The guy's never gotten a deal done, ever, because he's a fucking clown. But that's the other thing. Johnson's got his head up his ass because he's got to say these things. The idea of a level set. What level set? Pete Hegseth went to Europe and said that Ukraine couldn't join NATO and that they should give up the land. There's no level set. They already surrendered. That's why Zelensky's pissed. But let's hear from the real president of the United States. Let's hear from President Musk, what he said at CPAC. And I want you to keep in mind, Elon Musk has never served a fucking day ever, right? Elon Musk has never served. But this is what Elon Musk said this week at CPAC.
Go on. Yeah. And imagine if that was your son, your father. What are they dying for? Yeah. What exactly are they dying for? That line the line of engagement has barely moved for 2 years. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of people dead in trenches for what? And I'll tell you what for what. It's like for the biggest graft machine that I've ever seen in my life. That's for what. It's unreal.
Yeah, Elon Musk wearing sunglasses, talking gibberish like he's stoned out of his mind. A man who's never served a day in his life in the military, on top of Trump's, saying that the whole thing really is just graft, when people are desperately fighting to save their country and their lives. That's what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their lives and their country's existence, their very existence. People like Elon Musk and Donald Trump don't understand the idea of an existential crisis because they've never actually had one. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as always, I've got the perfect guest to talk about that. My friend Philip Ittner, who we've been going back and forth on Twitter for probably years, to be honest with you. We finally get him on and talk about this as we approach the 3rd anniversary. So let's get on with the show. I'm Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy with FP Wellman, right here exclusively now on the MeidasTouch Network. And let's get on with the show. Welcome. I am Fred Wellman. A little glitching there. This is On Democracy FP Wellman. You know, we're doing it ourselves right at home here in the FP Wellman studio. We're so glad to have you. Look, got another insane week, and the big thing, of course, is that for me as a former soldier and a veteran, I've been talking a lot about Ukraine and where we stand and the issues we face. And I mentioned before the intro, we've got a great guest. I'm not going to waste any time. He and I started talking during the pre-roll. I want to welcome my friend Philip Ittner. Philip is a journalist, longtime broadcast journalist, now based in Ukraine. He's broadcasting on the edge, as you can see, from Kyiv today, I believe, right, Phil? So
Yep,
welcome to the show.
Kyiv.
So you had a loud night, I'm hearing, understand.
Yeah. The Muscovites made their presence known. It doesn't happen every night, and some nights are better than others. And then crack of dawn is another favorite time when they like to chuck munitions at us. Again, sometimes we have it better than other nights. Sometimes we get a special quiet night, but last night they sent a few drones over, and anti-aircraft woke me up. I think it was around 3 in the morning.
That's life.
I apologize if I'm a little fuzzy.
Yeah, that's life of wartime for everybody there. It's a whole country being
It
traumatized.
is.
Now going on 3 years next week. I mean, how long have you been there, Phil? You've been there since the beginning, haven't you?
Since the beginning. I've been coming here for 25 years, though. I was on the Maidan, the Independence Square in 2014 when they ousted Yanukovych, the kind of Moscow-backed autocrat dictator, and was there and kind of promised, because folks on the square knew that Moscow was not going to let their colony, and this is an imperial colonization war. This is a bid for independence from an empire. They came to me on the square back in 14 and said, we know they're going to come for us. It's not a matter of if, but when. Please don't forget us. Our history has been so much betrayal where the big bad Russian bear comes in and one empire or another fights over this place, but never with the local folks, the independence of the Ukrainians, and they begged me not to abandon them, basically. And so when the full-scale invasion happened, I got on a plane and came over, and I've been here I've been here ever since. And I did not think it was going to be 3 years. I'm sad to say that it is, and it's just one of those things. We got to do it. This is a really important conflict that I feel, sadly, our press corps kind of let down folks by not fully explaining why this is so important. So unfortunately, it falls to little independent guys like me.
Largest land war in Europe since World War II. Obviously, it's a major land war. It's been going on. It's easy to dismiss that because it has ground to sort of a neutral stance in a lot of ways, but it's not. People are fighting for their literally an existential crisis. Ukraine will cease to exist if they fail, won't they?
Yeah, and not only that, it's an inflection. I firmly believe it's the most important conflict I've ever reported on. And I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've covered it over a dozen wars. But this one will shape, however this, ends. However, whatever the result of this is, if it is a conclusive end and not just something that kicks the can down the road, this will determine the fate of, I argue, the globe, because it'll alter the fate of Europe. It'll alter the fate of the transatlantic alliance, and it will also decide whether or not the world is going to, continue to, or at least in some parts, go down the road of liberal democracy and the rule of law, or it's going to go back to, autocracies and kind of regional dominion of, your immediate abroad. You have spheres of influence on the globe, and you get into power blocks and things like that. What is the future going to going to be determined here, and that hasn't been articulated well enough, I think, to Western and English speaking audiences.
And we hear echoes of that now. Here, I was talking with a friend last night who's a national security expert. She sent me an article she wrote about, in many ways, Trump is echoing a lot of this with this talk of Canada and Panama and Greenland.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're just referred to, is the idea that he's literally echoed the Lebensraum, if you will, is what Germany called it, right? Which is the living room, that this is our era, this is our place to dominate. The idea that we could designate parts of, we could just invade Mexico like it's our backyard. That's old school thinking. That's World War II-esque thinking, isn't it? And that's exactly what Putin has opened that door to. And here we face it. And I do think you're right. That perspective is being lost, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine would fall under Moscow's dominion.
Right.
Huge chunks of Europe, if not the entire continent, frankly, would fall under their strong influence and power. And then we would get the Americas, and China would get the South China Sea and all the rest of it. And screw sovereignty. You fall under the dominion of one power or another, and that's your lot in life. And that's not how the Ukrainians want to live, and that's not how I want to see the world develop either. So
Right.
I find common cause here.
Right. It was supposed to be 3 days. It's now 3 years. Make it clear to our audience, why is it 3 years? It's the Ukrainians, isn't it?
It's the Ukrainians.
It's the Ukrainians, isn't it?
It's their Cossacks, man. You don't mess with Cossacks. They are fierce in their defense of this country, and it's not for nothing. I've seen a lot of talk in the last week, not least of which by Elon Musk, but a lot of others as well, of this, like, these fools, these silly Ukrainians who are defending themselves and fighting for. Well, they're not doing it. They're not doing it for America. They're not doing it for the CIA. They're not doing it for anything other than they want their country to be sovereign. They want their children to grow up in a free and sovereign Ukraine, and generations to come. It's on down through history. This is going to be a major shift, because they have been fighting for their independence, and this is another point that has not been articulated enough, I think, within the news media and within the with things that people are consuming. They've been fighting for their freedom here for arguably centuries, but at least over a century. Every time Moscow gets weakened, like after the Bolshevik Revolution, or when they were pushed back by, sadly, the Wehrmacht and in the Second World War, every time when Moscow gets on its back heel, the Ukrainians try and take the opportunity to be their own country, because this is a very different place than Russia. It's not the same at all. There's a complete cultural difference. There's all sorts of things. And each time they have been betrayed, or they have, they've thrown their lot in with the losing side, like in the Second World War. This time, this is the third Ukrainian War of Independence, and this one has got to succeed. And despite everything, I am still optimistic that is going to happen. This is not a lost cause, and these soldiers, the people who are on the front line, are not fighting for something negligible or something to scoff at. They're fighting for the rule of law. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for concepts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, inalienable rights, which Russia denies them. Russia, there's an ideological issue, aside from the geopolitical issues that may have started this war, the security issues, or even if you want to say resources. I think that's a minor point. There's an ideological difference, and Ukrainians are Europeans. They're not schizophrenic like the Russians, who they have a double-headed eagle on their flag for a reason. They look east and west. No, the Ukrainians are, firm in their desire to be a modern liberal democracy, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth dying for. And that's why they're fighting like hell. And they're going to keep doing it. I've been out to the front lines. I've seen their defensive positions. And as a military man yourself, Fred, you look at some of these things, and like, they have a strategic defense in depth. Okay. And you and I both know what that kind of means. There's line after line after line of defenses that they can fall back on. and they make the Russians pay for every mile that they try and take. And it goes all the way through the Donbass, all the way up into, there's a town called Kramatorsk, which is a really large industrial town that is kind of the gateway to the Donbass. They struggle to take little towns like Chasiv Yar or Bakhmut or Avdiivka, these towns of about maybe 60, 70,000 people kind of population. You start getting up into the hundreds of thousands of population, or even like a city like Kharkiv, which is over 1 million. And these places, especially in the industrialized East, will be fortresses. The Russians don't have the capacity to do what it is that they need to do here.
Right.
And the doom spreading and the assumption that Russia will inevitably win comes straight out of the Kremlin. And the fact that our leadership, all the way up to the Oval, regurgitates these talking points that it's an unwinnable war, it's a forever war, it's the Ukrainians are foolish for defending themselves, is all coming out of the Kremlin. And it's really distressing.
It's shocking to hear clear Russian talking points coming out of the people who are supposed to be our leaders, and they've clearly switched sides. I mean, history will tell us how that happened and why. But let's talk about a little bit about just those kind of talking points, right? Obviously the big one that Trump used in that the clip, the post I showed earlier. Oh, he's very not popular, because Trump's all about popularity. Oh, he's not popular. He's a dictator. That's the cute one Elon's been throwing around. He's a dictator. Obviously, Putin is a dictator. Can you explain for folks who don't get it how the martial law enactment works in Ukraine and how it wasn't just Zelensky canceling elections? I mean, there's just so much lies. I just want to break a couple of those.
Well, in a shameless plug for my channel on the
there
Edge,
we go.
which you can find if you just search my name.
We encourage you here, Phil.
Yeah, that's right. I'm shameless. I am absolutely shameless when it comes to promoting not myself but the cause of Ukraine. I am absolutely shameless. So there's a plug for you. But I sat down in one of our episodes with a member of the parliament here, the Rada, and she was involved in the vote to declare martial law. And she tells the story, and it is incredibly moving. Bombs are dropping on the city of Kiev, February 24th, 3 years ago. Bombs are dropping on Kiev. The tanks are at the gates, and they call as many members of the parliament as they can possibly get to come into town to hold a special session and a special vote to initiate martial law. They got as many as they could, and and it moves me to this day to think of when she tells me this story, they were singing the national anthem as they were voting for martial law. Because they had no idea. They didn't know. I mean, obviously the Rada, the parliament, was a target. Tanks, had they rolled down the main streets of Kiev, would have rolled up on the parliament. And God knows what they would have done to these. Nobody knew at that time. It was an incredible act of bravery. And that under the Ukrainian constitution, by law, initiated by a vote of the legislative body of Ukraine, you cannot hold an election in times of martial law. Now, they could meet again, and they could amend that law to allow for a presidential election. But again, the legislative body, made up of a large collection of representatives and members of parliament, they're not doing that. Why are they not doing that? Because they have bigger fish to fry, and they know that it would be extremely disruptive to hold a vote. Now, is Zelensky universally loved? No, he is not. But as Kira Rudik, the member of parliament who I spoke with, she said, there are also members of our fellow members of the parliament that we don't get along with. We have a democracy. It's messy, and it's still finding its footing, but it is a democracy. And she said, I would love to argue with some of my fellow members of parliament, but we agreed on those fateful days of the first days of the invasion, the full-scale invasion, now is not the time for internal fighting. And so this is by design. They know exactly what they're doing. They are not coerced. Zelensky did not install martial law. It was voted upon, and it's not arbitrary. It's not extrajudicial. It is written into their constitution. So this concept that's being spread that Zelensky is unpopular is not true. The day after he made that screed about him, Zelensky being a dictator, I happened to go in to get the old soup strainer kind of trimmed up at the barber shop. And what better place to take a gauge of kind of, I know it's anecdotal, but to get a gauge of things is to go to a place like a barbershop or a pub or a coffee shop, right? And engage. And I did. And as I was sitting there getting my beard cleaned up, I could hear them talking in the background, and they were repeatedly, they said, well, if Trump doesn't like him, I'm voting for him. He actually boosted Zelensky because now Zelensky is not only standing up to Vladimir Putin, he's standing up to Donald Trump.
Right.
And it actually was counterproductive if he wanted to kind of shame Zelensky. Ukrainians don't like that. They will squabble amongst themselves till the cows come home. But if you come after them, they'll circle the wagons and they'll support him, and that's what they're doing. Even if there was a vote tomorrow, there's a very good chance that Zelensky would win it, and that's not what Moscow wants. And the whole reason, sadly and disturbingly, why the Trump administration is pushing for a vote is because Putin wants it. I don't think the team that Donald Trump chose has a care or a wit about a new election. They're doing it because the Kremlin wants it.
Which is a terrifying prospect, and where they get their talking points.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things we talked about was the idea that Johnson's trying to float that this is actually just the opening act, right? That they're level setting when they went to Saudi Arabia without Ukrainians. Obviously, that's horseshit, right? The Ukrainians have to have a voice in their future. And what's your side on that? And what are you hearing in Ukraine about the idea of being actually left out of negotiations? And also, what the fuck the Saudi Arabians being involved in? But that's it's all about the paymaster. I mean, it's all about the paymaster of Trump.
Now we're hearing maybe the next round might be in South Africa. There's all sorts of places, all sorts of reasons where the locations are being picked. But as far as any kind of U.S. negotiated peace plan is concerned, this is another reason why having a loose cannon man-child in the Oval is that screed where he came out and basically regurgitated all the talking points that Putin puts forward and all the talking points that the GRU puts into our body politic. Had Ukrainians going, well, anything that comes out of that negotiation, especially if we're not involved, but regardless, sadly, a lot of Ukrainians have responded by saying, I don't know if we can trust the United States to be a good faith operator when it comes to a negotiated peace. And I fear Marco Rubio might just as well, pack up his bags and go home, because a lot of this is now being seen with a very skeptical eye, if not being DOA, dead on arrival when it hits Zelensky's desk, if indeed it even remotely follows along with the kind of mentality and the wish list of Vladimir Putin. And that's what a lot of people are afraid of here. Everybody wants this war ended. Nobody wants this war to be over than those of us who live in Ukraine and Ukrainians. I myself want to go home. I want to fulfill my promise on Maidan and go home. I have covered over a dozen wars. I am sick to death of war. I want to go do documentaries about the migratory pattern of the monarch butterfly in California, or the Great Lakes. Something nice, something that doesn't have to do with children refugees and death and destruction. But I'm obligated. I firmly believe in this war, in what's happening here, and the importance of what's happening here. Everybody wants this war to be finished and to end, but it has to end in a way such that it doesn't just resume in another 2, 3, 5, 10 years. If you'll allow me, Fred, of course, there's a point I need to make while we have this time together, is to understand that Russia, I spoke earlier about Russia being able to take like larger cities and more territory out east. And their slow movement in Donbass at extreme cost to them. Ultimately, what they need to do, the Russians need to do two things primarily. They need to take over and install a puppet government in Kiev that is friendly to Moscow. given the last 3 years and the trauma and the blood that has been spilt here, that is not going to happen. Anybody that has even the remotest connection to Moscow will be persona non grata. So they're not going to be able to change the government in Kiev to one that is friendly towards them. And secondly, and perhaps just as importantly, they're not going to take the port at Odessa, which means that Russia will no longer have dominion of the Black Sea, which they have enjoyed for centuries. And much of this war is actually about their access to a warm water port on the Crimean Peninsula, a place called Sevastopol, where they have one of their only 4 major fleets. And if Odessa is not taken by the Russians, that Black Sea fleet port will always be at risk, and that will be unacceptable to them because, as I reiterate, this is a war about empire and Russia being able to project its imperial power beyond, its current borders.
Yeah. And that's the key. And they can't. I mean, I saw a report yesterday that said Estonian intelligence is saying that for every 1 kilometer they gain at this point, they're losing 100 soldiers. They've had to turn to Iran. They've had to turn to North Korea. So the idea that the Russians have the power on their own to do this has become ludicrous a long time ago, just from open source intelligence, right? I mean, just stuff we know. I mean, they are desperate. They're running out of their own men and women. They're raiding bars. They're raiding nightclubs. You see videos constantly, right? So the idea that Russia can maintain this war forever is ludicrous at the face of it, isn't it? And so there is an end state. I guess the next thing I want to talk about too is, and I just want to take a quick pause. We do have a sponsor I need to answer. We're going to talk it. We're just going to keep on talking. We'll be right back. We got one sponsor. I've said it a few times that eating well in this crazy world right now is one of my biggest goals and frankly my biggest challenges right now. I'm lucky to have Factor meals. Factor has chef-made meals that make eating well much easier. They're dietitian approved. They're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, and you can give you the fuel you need to feel great no matter how busy you are. And you guys get it. My life's a little bit crazy doing shows and keeping busy and checking the news. Factor arrives fresh at your doorstep, fully prepared for any active or busy lifestyle. They've even got a new keto style meal that can help you lose 8 pounds in 8 weeks. It's based on a randomized controlled clinical trial with Factor Keto. Results will vary, but they are working with diet and exercise. They've got 40 options and 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week. It's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. You can choose from, Calorie Smart or Calorie Protein or Keto, whatever you're into. I had this smoky Gouda chicken, and it was so good. I had it for lunch yesterday. It took me 2 minutes to cook in between shoots, and it was delicious. And here's the thing. It's really good food. The chicken is tender and juicy. It doesn't taste like a meal you've been warming up and microwaving or otherwise. Factor can help you beat all day, be your best all day long with wholesome smoothies. They've got breakfast. They've got grab-and-go snacks. There's all these add-ons you can add on in your order. You can reach your goals with the healthy ingredients you can trust and the convenience that we all need. Now, here's the key. You can see it on the screen. Eat smart with Factor. You can get started at factormeals.com/Fred50off and use code FRED50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. So as it says on the screen, it's code FRED50off at factormeals.com/Fred50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your very first box. Factor, love the food, love the sponsorship. Thanks for being part of On Democracy. And we're back. I guess I do want to say that this idea that Treasury Secretary showed up with Czechoslovakia, which is a whole fucking other thing, and demanded half of their national resources, right? Trump was going on about that same press conference I showed at the beginning about, what's the reception of the idea that a country has to give away half their mineral resources essentially forever? Again, it's extortion right there. It sounds like
it's straight up extortion.
It is.
Yeah,
right.
You got a lovely little country there, Ukraine. It's a shame if something would happen to it. It's reprehensible. And what we understand, the way that whole thing was conducted was, Trump likes to, has said that Zelenskyy was asleep and that he was still sleeping. It's just,
there's
insane.
Pictures. There's freaking pictures.
Yeah, it's crazy. They kept they kept him waiting, because apparently he came with what the agreement that he came with was far less than an agreement and much more of a demand. I mean, there's stories of him like trying to pressure Zelensky by saying you have an hour to decide, sort of thing. That's not how things are done. It was seen as very, very ham-fisted. Did not go down well here. Now, having said that, the idea of trading mineral rights or access to develop the extraction of rare earth minerals was actually floated by Zelensky. This is not a plan that was brought up by the Trump administration.
Okay.
Zelensky is a very, very smart head of state, very, very smart diplomat. He's negotiator. He knows what he's doing. He floated this idea because he knew that it was something that might entertain Trump's, interest. So he floated the idea, but what the Trump administration apparently came back with were demands that were so ludicrous of like, we get 50% of everything that's developed in perpetuity, for forevermore. We will be able to take 50% of your profits from this industry or these industries. Then there was the talk of like, we want to be able to have, we want you to give us your port. We want to get territory. We want to have access to this resource or that resource. And it was, again, like it was presented as a demand. Many people here still think that there's a probability that at some point there will be a negotiation about those rare earth minerals and they'll come to some sort of accommodation. There's still hope here for that because ultimately Ukrainians know that they need America on their side. They need, and if they can, if they want to give Trump a win and he can go and say, I got something back from those, those greedy Ukrainians, but I got them, the great negotiator that I am, the art of the deal. Ukrainians would go, fine, let him have his little ego trip. We need weapons. We need to have access to the arms market that is going to help defend this country. In particular, they need air defense. There's a very dire concern about a lack of Patriot missiles, which have been, protecting the cities here in Ukraine really well. So there's concern about that running out. They need that. But on the front lines, they have enough to keep defending and fighting to keep the Russian advance to a trickle, and as you say, at a massive cost to them. So they do want to find a way to keep America on side. I don't know how easy or difficult that's going to be, what concessions are going to have to be made. But they need those weapon systems. But before I toss it back to you, Fred, it's also worth noting that even if America does just never, not another bolt, not another bullet, not another shell gets sent from America to Ukraine, sadly, the Ukrainians will not stop fighting. The only difference that will make is a hell of a lot more Ukrainians will die, and it'll be on us because we will have betrayed our promises that we made to Ukraine, going all the way back to the Budapest memorandum, which we said, give up your nukes and we will guarantee your sovereignty. Well, we're letting them down on that guarantee. Aside from the fact that after the full-scale invasion happened, we said, no, this is wrong. We will support you. It won't stop Ukrainians fighting. All that will happen is we will watch from the sidelines as a enormous human tragedy is only exacerbated. I mean, we are upset by what's happening now. If they are denied access to the means to defend themselves, the tragedy will be exponentially worse because they can't stop fighting, because Russia's stated goal is the destruction of the identity of Ukraine, the identity of what it is to be Ukrainian. And we've seen it in the occupied territories. We have seen it by their statements. They really want to destroy the idea that Ukraine is anything other than another version of Russia. So they don't have a choice. And are we really going to sit by and watch? It's going to make, the last great massacre, great is maybe not the right word, but the last, massacre of note in Europe was Srebrenica. And we're both old enough to remember what happened in Bosnia with that awful massacre that they kind of turned a blind eye to, the monitors there did. And they still, here in Europe, rend their clothing about that. They're still deeply embarrassed and shamed by that. Srebrenica will be nothing compared to what the Russians will do if they march forward in Ukraine and start rounding people up. And they have a history of doing this stuff. It's not hyperbole.
No,
We
I
will
mean,
see awful things if we abandon these people because they're not going to stop fighting. It's existential, as you say.
I think it's a great place to wrap. And I think
I
that's
can get on my
exactly.
soapbox. I apologize.
No, that's why I want you here, Phil. Hey, I watch your show, bro. That's why I want you here.
I'm a gabby guy.
I'll run it again. I'll run your stuff again. Tell our followers or my viewers where I can find you. MeidasTouch is a big supporter, so where can they find you?
Well, I have my own channel. It's Philip Ittner, 1 L in Philip, 2 T's in Ittner. I've been posting there. I'm trying to. This is still a work in progress, and I'm an old dog and new tricks and all that kind of stuff. But if you'll just do a search for my name, Philip Ittner, we've been doing. I have a great team of Ukrainians here who are helping me develop this. I'm doing it out of pocket. But I firmly believe in the cause and in the importance of letting people know what's really happening here and who these people are, these Ukrainians, and why they're fighting as hard as they are. So we try to give it a little bit more in-depth coverage than maybe you might see on a network or on a cable show where they kind of just gloss over go out to the front lines and do that kind of stuff. I want people to know why this is happening and who these people are. So it's On the Edge. We put it out every Sunday. We do it 8 p.m. Kiev time, 6 p.m. London, and I think that's 10 a.m. Eastern. So what would that be? 10 a.m. Pacific. So that's 12 Eastern every Sunday. We got a whole range of great guests who talk about a couple of really important topics, and we dig deep into them so that you can understand why this is happening. Folks have to understand this is relevant to you. This is important because it's important to the global order moving forward. Yep. Do we want to have a rules-based order or not? Do we want to go back to might makes right and taking borders and shifting those borders by force of arms? Is that a world we want to return to? And not least of which also, does a people have the right, to seek their own future away from their imperial masters, a master who has no, respect for those concepts that we hold so dear, like inalienable rights. And I feel very strongly that we need to stand by these people and actually help them win, not just keep the status quo, but win. And we can do that.
I agree. I think it's an existential crisis for us as a democracy, and that's the key right there. So, man, thanks, Phil. Appreciate your time.
Anytime.
We'll keep in touch. I hope people follow you, and I'm so glad we finally got a chance to talk officially. So, a lot of
I'm at your disposal, or anybody else at the MeidasTouch. This is an important topic. Thank you for letting me.
We'll see you soon. I got to wrap the show. Good see you, bro. We'll be right back. Well, what a great conversation. You can tell Phil knows his shit, okay? And you see how important this is. I was struck as he finished there saying something really key. He said how important this is, that this is the existential crisis, that there's an imperial force trying to take over these countries. It doesn't take a long shot of thinking to realize when you hear Donald Trump and his propagandists talk about Canada as the fifth, literally the White House press secretary called Canada our 51st state before they whipped our ass in hockey yesterday. Okay. It doesn't take a stretch to see the imperial ambitions of Donald Trump and his lunatic followers like Elon Musk, who's the real president. It doesn't take much. And so it should scare you. So people say all the time that Trump is owned by Putin or that Putin gave him money. Nah, I think it's much easier than that. He loves Putin. There's a little known fact. Hitler actually followed Mussolini. Hitler was a huge Mussolini fan. Matter of fact, Mussolini found it annoying that Hitler was such a fanboy of his, with copying his style, using black shirts instead of brown shirts. That's as simple as it is with Donald Trump and his worship of Putin. He sees himself, he loves the idea of creating an imperial America under the emperor and king, Donald Trump. That's the moment we face. And you can see it unfolding in Ukraine and how important Ukraine is. That's what we have to do. So without further ado, I am Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy FP1 exclusively right now, right here on the MeidasTouch Network. You can find more of our content on the On Democracy channel on YouTube. We're putting up new shows. We've got a great new Sunday show. We're going to have Representative Marcy Kaptur on board. We've got some great panelists, 2 comedians. It's going to be hilarious. Another great Sunday show. As you know, the On Democracy Sunday, if you've heard, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Every Sunday live right here on the On Democracy channel. If you want to find more of my content, I'm writing at FP Wellman on Substack, the On Democracy Substack community, on and on and on. You can find us everywhere. But most importantly, I hope you'll share this. I hope you'll recommend it to your friends. I hope you'll like other channels. And of course, support the Meidas channel as we grow into a powerhouse with over 4 million subscribers. Thanks to you all joining us here on the MeidasTouch Network. This is why we work. This is how we fight. I'm Fred Wellman. We'll see you again soon. Keep up the fight. That's all we can do.